Picture this. You're the new student at Westfield High, trying to blend in, when suddenly you're trapped in complete darkness, thick foam expanding around you, cutting off your air supply. Most people would panic. Most people would scream. But what these bullies didn't know was that they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They'd chosen the wrong victim. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Riley Chun stood frozen in the school hallway as Madison Cross and her crew surrounded her with predatory grins that sent chills down her spine. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Westfield High's main corridor, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness creeping into Riley's day. She clutched her worn backpack tighter, the weight of her textbooks suddenly feeling insignificant compared to the heavy dread settling in her stomach. Madison's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the metal locker beside Riley's head, each tap echoing like a countdown timer in the otherwise empty hallway. The sound reverberated off the polished floors and pristine walls of this suburban Oregon high school, a place that looked nothing like the industrial training facilities Riley had grown up around in Portland. Here, everything seemed too clean, too perfect, too far removed from the real world she understood. Tyler Brooks, Madison's most devoted follower, held 2 large canisters of expanding foam insulation, the kind used for sealing gaps in construction projects. Riley recognized the industrial-grade material immediately, her trained eye automatically assessing the chemical composition and expansion rate. But she kept her knowledge hidden, her face maintaining the same uncertain expression that had marked her as an easy target since her first day at this school 3 weeks ago. "You know what, new girl?" Madison's voice dripped with false sweetness that made Riley's skin crawl. "We've been thinking about how to properly welcome you to Westfield High, and we've come up with something really special just for you." Riley's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed her back against the cold metal of her assigned locker. The combination lock dug into her shoulder blade, a sharp reminder of how trapped she felt in this moment. She could smell Madison's expensive perfume mixing with the chemical scent from the foam canisters, creating a nauseating combination that made her stomach churn. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, completely deserted as most students had already left for the day. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving light that made the situation feel even more surreal. Riley's sneakers squeaked against the waxed floor as she tried to step sideways, but Sam Wilson blocked her path with his broad shoulders, his face showing the first hints of uncertainty about what they were planning. "Please," Riley whispered, her voice barely audible above the mechanical sounds of the old building's heating system. "I haven't done anything to you. I just want to go home." Madison's laugh echoed off the lockers like breaking glass. "Oh, but you have done something, Riley. You exist. And honestly, that's enough for us." She gestured to Tyler, who began shaking one of the foam canisters with practiced efficiency. "See, we've been the queens of this school for 3 years. And we don't appreciate newcomers disrupting our carefully maintained ecosystem." Riley watched in growing horror as Madison's crew began their elaborate preparation. Casey Martinez held her phone high, obviously planning to record whatever humiliation they had planned. The red recording light blinked like an evil eye, promising that whatever happened next would be preserved forever for their entertainment. Riley's mind raced through possible escape routes, but Madison's positioning had been strategic, cutting off every potential exit. The late afternoon light continued to fade outside the windows, painting the hallway in increasingly ominous shades of orange and red. Somewhere in the distance, a janitor's cartwheel squeaked rhythmically, but the sound was too far away to offer any hope of intervention. Riley felt completely alone, isolated in this moment of impending crisis. "You see, Riley," Madison continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a simple concept to a child, Every school has its natural order. And you, with your thrift store clothes and your awkward little silences, clearly belong at the very bottom of that order. She paused dramatically, savoring the fear in Riley's eyes. So we're going to help you find your proper place. Tyler stepped forward with the foam canisters, his movements deliberate and menacing. Riley could see the manufacturer's warning. Labels clearly now, the bright red text cautioning about proper ventilation and protective equipment. Her pulse quickened as she realized the full extent of what they planned to do to her. These weren't just typical school bullies playing pranks. They were crossing lines that could have serious consequences. "Open your locker, Riley," Madison commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Now." Riley's trembling fingers fumbled with the combination lock, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar sequence, even as her conscious mind reeled with panic. The metal door swung open with a harsh creak, revealing the small, enclosed space. That would soon become her prison. Her few belongings hung limply from the hooks inside, looking pathetically sparse compared to the elaborate decorations she'd seen in other students' lockers. As Madison's crew prepared to execute their plan, none of them noticed the small certification badge hidden beneath Riley's worn jacket. None of them knew about the countless hours she'd spent training in confined spaces, learning how to remain calm when oxygen grew scarce, how to problem solve under extreme pressure. They saw only what they wanted to see, a scared, vulnerable new student with no friends to protect her and no apparent skills to defend herself. The foam canisters hissed ominously as Tyler prepared to activate them, the sound like angry serpents. Ready to strike. Riley closed her eyes and took one last deep breath of clean air, her training automatically kicking in as she prepared for what was about to happen. These bullies thought they were about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. They had no idea how right they were, just not in the way they expected. 20 miles away from the suffocating hallway of Westfield High, Jordan Chun sat in the pristine library of Riverside Prep Academy, surrounded by mahogany shelves that stretched toward vaulted ceilings adorned with classical architecture. The private school's atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the industrial chaos that had shaped both cousins' early lives. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across Jordan's perfectly organized study materials as she reviewed her advanced calculus homework with the kind of focused intensity that had earned her a full academic scholarship to this elite institution. Jordan's fingers moved gracefully across her tablet screen, solving complex equations with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed to perfection by the dormitory's laundry service. And her textbooks were brand new, their spines uncracked and covers unmarred, by the wear that comes from being passed between multiple students. Everything about her environment spoke of privilege, opportunity, and expectation of success. The library around her hummed with the quiet efficiency of serious academic pursuit. Students whispered in respectful tones about their upcoming applications to Ivy League universities, their conversations peppered with references to internships at prestigious firms and volunteer work in exotic locations, funded by their families' generous donations. Jordan fit seamlessly into this world now, her natural intelligence and determination having earned her acceptance among peers who had been groomed for success since birth. But success hadn't always been Jordan's reality. Like Riley, she had grown up in the shadow of industrial Portland, where their fathers had worked side by side in this same manufacturing plant until that terrible day when a chemical leak changed everything forever. The accident that claimed both their parents had split the cousins' paths dramatically, sending them toward completely different destinies that would shape who they became. Jordan's salvation had come in the form of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a wealthy widow who served on the board of several educational foundations. Mrs. Hartwell had been visiting the memorial service for the plant workers when she noticed Jordan's remarkable composure during her father's eulogy, the way the 12-year-old girl had spoken with wisdom beyond her Years about industrial safety and the importance of protecting workers' rights. Moved by Jordan's intelligence and poise during such a devastating time, Mrs. Hartwell had offered to sponsor Jordan's education at Riverside Prep, believing that such raw talent deserved cultivation in the finest academic environment money could provide. The transition hadn't been easy initially. Jordan remembered those first months at Riverside Prep with painful clarity. How her second-hand clothes had marked her as different among students who casually discussed their families' vacation homes and private jets. She had learned to navigate the complex social hierarchies of wealth and privilege, adapting her speech patterns to match her classmates, refined accents and studying their mannerisms until she could blend in seamlessly. Years of careful observation and deliberate practice had transformed Jordan into someone who appeared to belong in this rarefied world. She understood which brands carried social currency, how to make small talk about skiing trips to Switzerland, and when to remain strategically silent about her humble origins. The other students saw her as one of their own now, never suspecting that beneath her polished exterior lay memories of government-subsidized housing and food stamps. Jordan's academic excellence had become her armor and her weapon. She maintained a perfect grade point average, not just because she loved learning, but because she understood that her scholarship depended on continued outstanding performance. Every test score, every essay, every class participation grade was insurance against returning to the poverty that had claimed so many others from her old neighborhood. Success wasn't just a goal for Jordan, it was survival. The tragedy that had destroyed her family had also forged Jordan's character in ways that set her apart from her privileged classmates. While they stressed about relatively minor social dramas or academic pressures, Jordan possessed a perspective shaped by genuine loss and hardship. She had learned to compartmentalize emotions, to function under pressure, and to make calculated decisions based on long-term strategic thinking, rather than immediate gratification. Her relationship with Riley had become complicated by their divergent paths. They stayed in touch through occasional text messages and brief phone calls, but the gulf between their daily experiences had grown wider with each passing year. Jordan lived in a world of abundance and opportunity, where teachers encouraged her ambitions and counselors helped plan her route to prestigious universities. Riley, meanwhile, had been shuffled through the foster care system before finally landing with their Aunt Lisa, a well-meaning woman who worked double shifts at a local diner just to keep food on the table. Jordan often felt guilty about her good fortune, especially when Riley would mention the challenges of her current high school experience. Westfield High wasn't a bad school by most standards, but it lacked the resources and individualized attention that Jordan took for granted at Riverside Prep, while Jordan's teachers knew her career goals and actively worked to help her achieve them. Riley seemed to drift through her classes largely unnoticed, just another face in overcrowded classrooms where teachers struggled to maintain basic order. The differences in their circumstances had shaped their personalities in contrasting ways. Jordan had developed a polished confidence that allowed her to command attention in any room, whether she was delivering a presentation to the school board or debating policy issues with visiting politicians. She had learned to advocate for herself and others, understanding that in her privileged world, articulate self-promotion was not just accepted, but expected. Riley, by contrast, had learned the survival value of invisibility. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After years of being shuffled between temporary living situations and navigating schools where standing out often meant becoming a target, she had perfected the art of blending into the background, where Jordan's intelligence manifested as academic achievement and leadership roles. Riley showed itself through practical skills and quiet competence in areas that often went unrecognized in traditional educational settings. Jordan's phone buzzed softly against the polished wood of her library table, momentarily interrupting her concentration on a particularly challenging calculus problem. The message was from Riley, just as simple. "Hope your day is going better then." Mine, accompanied by an emoji that tried to make light of whatever frustration had prompted the text. Jordan stared at the message for a long moment, sensing something deeper behind her cousin's casual words. The late afternoon light was beginning to fade outside the library's stained glass windows, casting the reading room in increasingly dramatic shadows. Jordan glanced around at her classmates, all of them focused on their own academic pursuits with the kind of intense concentration that came from knowing their futures were virtually guaranteed. Their families' connections would smooth their paths to elite universities, prestigious internships, and eventual positions of influence in whatever fields they chose to pursue. Jordan understood that her own path, while privileged compared to Riley's, still required more strategic navigation. She couldn't rely on family connections or inherited wealth to open doors. Her success depended entirely on her ability to continue proving herself worthy of the opportunities she'd been given. This knowledge had made her simultaneously grateful for her circumstances and acutely aware of how precarious her position remained. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, Jordan wondered what kind of person she might have become if the accident had never happened. If both she and Riley had continued growing up together in their working-class neighborhood, would she have developed the same drive for academic excellence, or would she have found different ways to express her intelligence? Would Riley have discovered her remarkable practical skills, or would they have remained hidden beneath the expectations of a more conventional educational path? The sound of the evening bell interrupted Jordan's contemplation, signaling the end of the formal study period. Students began packing their materials with the efficient movements of those accustomed to structured schedules and clear expectations. Jordan gathered her own belongings slowly, her mind still occupied by the vague unease that Riley's message had triggered. As she walked across the campus toward her dormitory, Jordan passed the memorial garden that honored the school's founding families. Bronze plaques commemorated generations of philanthropists and business leaders who had shaped the institution's character and values. Jordan paused beside the newest addition to the memorial wall, a plaque honoring Mrs. Hartwell's contributions to educational access for deserving students from underrepresented backgrounds. Standing in the gathering twilight, surrounded by symbols of privilege and tradition, Jordan felt the familiar tension between gratitude and guilt that had become a constant companion over the years. She had been given extraordinary opportunities, but she was also acutely aware that her good fortune had come at the cost of family tragedy. Success felt like both a tribute to her parents' memory and a betrayal of the community they had left behind. The evening air carried the scent of expensive flowers from the school's meticulously maintained gardens, a sharp contrast to the industrial smells that had filled Jordan's childhood. As she climbed the steps to her dormitory, Jordan found herself thinking about Riley again, wondering what challenges her cousin was facing at Westfield High and wishing there was some way to bridge the growing distance between their separate worlds. The morning alarm at Cedar Point Youth Center rang at 5:30, just as it had every day for the past 2 years. Riley rolled out of her narrow bunk bed with practiced efficiency, her movements silent to avoid waking the other residents who shared the dormitory-style room. The institutional lighting flickered to life automatically, casting harsh shadows across the utilitarian space that had become more familiar to her than any family home she could remember. Riley's morning routine was methodical and purposeful. She pulled on her work clothes, heavy denim jeans and steel-toed boots that looked out of place among the fashionable sneakers and designer backpacks that filled Westfield High's hallways. These weren't fashion choices but tools of survival, selected for durability and protection rather than style. Her thick flannel shirt bore small scorch marks from welding sparks, badges of honor from her weekend training sessions at Northwest Technical Academy. The youth center's cafeteria buzzed, with the controlled chaos of 30 teenagers preparing for another day. Riley moved through the breakfast line efficiently, selecting protein-heavy options that would sustain her through long hours of physical activity. She had learned to view food as fuel rather than pleasure, a practical approach that served her well in an environment where resources were carefully managed and waste wasn't tolerated. At a corner table, Riley opened her worn notebook and reviewed her daily schedule. First period was advanced physics, where she consistently earned top grades despite her classmates' assumptions about her academic abilities. Her teacher, Dr. Morrison, had initially been surprised by Riley's intuitive understanding of pressure dynamics and structural engineering principles, not realizing that her knowledge came from hands-on experience rather than theoretical study. Riley's understanding of confined spaces hadn't developed in a classroom, but through countless hours of practical application. During her early years in foster care, she had discovered an aptitude for crawling into tight spaces to perform repairs and maintenance tasks that adults couldn't manage. What had started as a way to make herself useful to overwhelmed caretakers had evolved into genuine expertise as she sought out formal training opportunities. The Northwest Technical Academy had welcomed Riley when traditional educational environments had failed her. While other students struggled with abstract concepts, Riley absorbed lessons about atmospheric testing, ventilation requirements, and emergency protocols with the intensity of someone who understood that this knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Her instructors had been impressed by her natural talent for remaining calm under pressure and her methodical approach to problem-solving in challenging conditions. Riley's certification in confined space rescue represented hundreds of hours of training that most people would find claustrophobic and terrifying. She had learned to work in spaces barely wider than her body, to monitor oxygen levels while performing complex tasks, and to maintain clear thinking when surrounded by darkness and mechanical noise. The skills that made her valuable in industrial settings, however, had little currency in the social ecosystem of high school. The bus ride to Westfield High took Riley through neighborhoods that showcased the economic diversity of Riverside. She watched through grimy windows as modest apartment complexes gave way to increasingly elaborate single-family homes, each transition marking another step up the socio-economic ladder. By the time the bus reached the school's circular driveway, Riley was surrounded by students whose morning routines had included choosing between multiple outfit options and deciding which of their parents' cars to drive to school. Riley's first class was advanced physics, where she sat in the back row and listened as Dr. Morrison explained pressure differentials using textbook examples that seemed abstract compared to her real-world experience. When he described how atmospheric pressure changes affected human physiology in enclosed spaces, Riley could have provided detailed personal accounts of working in environments where such knowledge was critical for survival. Instead, she remained silent, understanding that sharing her expertise would only draw unwanted attention. The contrast between Riley's practical knowledge and her classmates' theoretical understanding became even more apparent during laboratory exercises. While other students struggled to understand why certain safety protocols were necessary, Riley instinctively implemented procedures that reflected genuine respect for the potential dangers they were studying. Her lab partners often seemed puzzled by her insistence on double-checking ventilation systems and emergency exits, not understanding that these habits had been drilled into her through professional training. During lunch period, Riley usually found refuge in the school's maintenance areas, where the familiar sounds of industrial equipment provided comfort that the cafeteria's social pressures couldn't match. Mr. Patterson, the head custodian, had initially been suspicious of Riley's presence in restricted areas, but gradually came to appreciate her genuine interest in the building's mechanical systems. He discovered that Riley could identify potential problems with heating and ventilation equipment that he might have missed, her trained ear detecting subtle changes in motor sounds or airflow patterns. These informal mentoring sessions with Mr. Patterson represented the closest thing to friendship that Riley had found at Westfield High. Their conversations centered around practical topics, like preventive maintenance schedules and safety regulations. Discussions that felt more meaningful to Riley than the social dynamics that dominated her peers' interactions. Mr. Patterson, a veteran of 20 years in building maintenance, recognized Riley's professional-level knowledge and treated her with the respect due to a fellow expert. Riley's afternoon classes presented different challenges. In English literature, Mrs. Williams assigned group projects that required extensive collaboration outside of school hours. Riley's classmates politely included her in their planning discussions, but invariably scheduled meetings at coffee shops or each other's homes, locations that were either financially or logistically impossible for Riley to reach. Her suggestions for meeting at the public library were met with polite agreement that somehow never translated into actual alternative arrangements. The social isolation that resulted from these practical barriers was more painful than outright hostility. Riley understood that her classmates weren't deliberately excluding her from their privileged world. They simply couldn't conceive of circumstances that would make their casual assumptions about transportation, spending money, and free time invalid. Their inability to imagine her reality was in some ways more isolating than intentional cruelty would have been. After school, Riley walked the 3 miles to Northwest Technical Academy for her advanced training sessions. The industrial complex where the academy was housed felt like coming home after hours of navigating Westfield High's social complexities. Here, her steel-toed boots and practical clothing marked her as someone serious about her craft rather than someone who couldn't afford better options. The training facility's main floor housed mock confined spaces that replicated the conditions Riley might encounter in real industrial settings. Shipping containers modified with complex internal structures, underground tunnel systems with multiple levels and access points, and elevated platforms that required rope work to reach safely. Each exercise was designed to test not just technical skills, but mental resilience under pressure. Riley's instructor, Marcus Webb, was a 20-year veteran of industrial rescue operations who had seen too many preventable accidents caused by inadequate training or poor judgment. He pushed his students hard because he understood that half measures in confined space work could result in tragedy. Under his guidance, Riley had developed the kind of systematic thinking that allowed her to assess complex situations quickly and develop effective response strategies. The afternoon's training exercise involved navigating a multi-level confined space while wearing full breathing apparatus and carrying emergency equipment. Riley moved through the darkened maze with confidence born of experience, her headlamp cutting through shadows as she methodically checked each section for potential hazards. The weight of her equipment felt natural now, distributed across her body in ways that allowed for maximum mobility while maintaining essential safety margins. When Riley emerged from the training exercise, her face flushed with exertion, but her breathing steady and controlled, Marcus noted her completion time with satisfaction. She had improved her efficiency by nearly 15% over the past month while maintaining perfect safety protocol compliance. In the industrial world, such improvement represented the difference between successful rescue operations and potential disasters. The contrast between Riley's competence in this environment and her struggles at Westfield High couldn't have been more stark. Here, her knowledge was valued and her skills were recognized. Her instructors treated her as a professional in training rather than a charity case or social outcast. The respect she earned through demonstrated ability felt more genuine than any popularity she might have achieved through conforming to high school social expectations. As evening approached, Riley helped clean and maintain the training equipment with the same careful attention she brought to all her technical work. These routine tasks served multiple purposes, reinforcing safety habits while providing time for informal debriefing with other students. The conversations that developed during equipment maintenance often revealed Insights about technique and safety that formal instruction couldn't provide. Riley's fellow trainees came from diverse backgrounds, but they shared a common commitment to professional excellence that transcended social and economic differences. Here, she found acceptance based on competence rather than appearance or family connections. The bonds formed through shared challenges and mutual reliance felt more substantial than the superficial friendship she observed among her high school classmates. The bus ride back to Cedar Point Youth Center took Riley through the same neighborhoods she had traveled that morning, but the evening light transformed the familiar scenery. Porch lights beginning to flicker on in the expensive homes reminded her of the distance between her world and the one inhabited by most of her classmates. These weren't just physical distances measured in miles, but gaps in experience and opportunity that seemed nearly impossible to bridge. Back at the youth center, Riley completed her homework with the same systematic approach she brought to her technical training. Her physics assignments were easy after spending hours applying those principles in real-world conditions. Her literature essays, while requiring different skills, benefited from the analytical thinking that confined spacework had taught her. She had learned to break complex problems into manageable components, a skill that served her well regardless of the subject matter. As lights out approached at the youth center, Riley lay in her narrow bunk and reviewed the day's events. The morning's encounter with Madison Cross and her crew felt like an inevitable escalation of tensions that had been building since her arrival at Westfield High. Riley understood that her differences from her classmates made her a target, but she also knew that she possessed skills and knowledge that none of them could imagine. The irony wasn't lost on Riley that the same training that made her feel confident and capable in industrial settings had little social value in the world of high school politics. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, to think systematically about complex problems, and to work effectively in challenging conditions were precisely the qualities that would serve her well if Madison's crew decided to escalate their harassment campaign. The Monday morning announcement crackled through Westfield High's ancient intercom system, Principal Davis's voice echoing off the hallway walls with news that would change everything. The school was launching a new peer mentorship program designed to help students struggling with social integration, and they needed volunteers from the upperclassmen ranks to serve as guides for students who might benefit from additional support. Riley paused at her locker, listening to the details with growing interest. The program promised structured social interaction, academic support, and most importantly, protection from the kind of harassment that had become her daily reality. Students could self-nominate for mentoring, and the program administrators would match them with compatible upperclassmen based on shared interests and complementary strengths. For the first time since arriving at Westfield High, Riley felt a spark of genuine hope. Perhaps there was a way to navigate the social complexities of this school without constantly looking over her shoulder for Madison Cross and her increasingly aggressive crew. The mentorship program represented exactly the kind of institutional support that had been missing from her high school experience. During her lunch period, Riley made her way to the guidance counselor's office where Mrs. Henderson was coordinating the new program. The counselor's office felt like a safe haven from the cafeteria's social battlefield, its walls lined with college brochures and motivational posters that promised brighter futures for students willing to work toward their goals. Mrs. Henderson greeted Riley with the kind of professional warmth that suggested genuine interest in student welfare. She explained that the mentorship program had been designed specifically to address the social isolation that affected many students, particularly those from non-traditional backgrounds who might struggle to find their place in Westfield High's established social ecosystem. Riley filled out the application with careful honesty, describing her interests in technical education and industrial safety, her academic strengths in physics and mathematics, and her desire to find meaningful connections with fellow students who shared her serious approach to education. She mentioned her training at Northwest Technical Academy, hoping that her specialized knowledge might be viewed as an asset rather than an oddity. The matching process would take several days, Mrs. Henderson explained, during which the program administrators would review applications and identify optimal pairings based on compatibility assessments and personality profiles. Rayleigh left the guidance office feeling more optimistic than she had in weeks, finally seeing a potential path toward the kind of respectful relationship she had observed among her training partners at the Technical Academy. What Rayleigh didn't know was that Madison Cross had been watching her movements carefully, noting her visit to the guidance office and correctly deducing her participation in the new mentorship program. Madison's network of information gathering was more sophisticated than most students realized, built on relationships with student office assistants who had access to confidential information about program participants. Through careful cultivation of these insider connections, Madison learned not just that Rayleigh had applied for mentoring, but also the specific details of her application, including her descriptions of her technical training and her hopes for finding acceptance among her peers. This information represented exactly the kind of leverage that Madison specialized in exploiting for maximum psychological impact. Madison's approach to social manipulation was methodical and strategic. She understood that direct confrontation, while satisfying in the moment, often resulted in administrative intervention that could limit her future options. More effective was the kind of subtle psychological warfare that left victims isolated and demoralized while maintaining plausible deniability about her involvement. The opportunity Madison had been waiting for presented itself when she discovered that her younger sister's boyfriend, Derek Wilson, had been selected as one of the peer mentors for the new program. Derek was a genuinely well-meaning senior who had volunteered for the program out of sincere desire to help struggling students, but his relationship with Madison's sister made him vulnerable to family pressure that he didn't fully understand. Madison's manipulation of Derek was masterful in its subtlety. She didn't directly instruct him to target Rayleigh or sabotage the mentorship relationship. Instead, she shared carefully selected information about Rayleigh's background, framing her concerns in language that sounded protective rather than malicious. She expressed worry about Derek's safety, given Rayleigh's training with industrial chemicals and confined space equipment. The information Madison provided was technically accurate, but deliberately distorted to create maximum anxiety. She described Rayleigh's expertise with breathing apparatus and emergency protocols in ways that made them sound ominous rather than professional. She mentioned Rayleigh's ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, as if it indicated psychological instability, rather than professional competence. Derek, lacking any context for evaluating these claims, found himself increasingly uncomfortable with the mentorship assignment he had initially embraced enthusiastically. Madison's suggestions that Rayleigh might be dangerous or unstable took root in his mind, particularly when reinforced by carefully orchestrated encounters that seemed to confirm his growing suspicions. The first mentorship meeting was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon in the school library, a neutral environment where Derek and Rayleigh could get acquainted and establish the parameters of their working relationship. Rayleigh arrived early, having selected a quiet corner table where they could talk without interruption. She brought examples of her technical coursework, hoping to share her genuine enthusiasm for industrial safety and confined space rescue. Derek's arrival marked the beginning of Rayleigh's first real betrayal at Westfield High. His demeanor was noticeably different from the friendly professionalism she had expected based on the program's promotional materials. He seemed nervous, constantly glancing around the library as if expecting some kind of threat, and his questions focused more on Rayleigh's technical training than on her academic needs or social goals. The conversation that followed revealed Derek's fundamental misunderstanding of Rayleigh's expertise and intentions. He asked pointed questions about her access to industrial chemicals, her training with breathing apparatus, and her knowledge of building mechanical systems. Each question was framed as casual interest, but Riley quickly recognized the underlying suspicion that motivated his inquiries. Riley's attempts to explain the safety-focused nature of her training only seemed to increase Derek's anxiety. When she described her experience working in confined spaces, Derek's expression suggested he was imagining dangerous scenarios rather than professional competence. Her mentions of emergency protocols and rescue procedures were met with visible unease, rather than the respect such skills typically commanded in professional settings. The mentorship session deteriorated further when Derek began asking personal questions that seemed designed to probe for psychological instability rather than to understand Riley's social needs. He inquired about her living situation at Cedar Point Youth Center, her family background, and her reasons for pursuing technical education rather than traditional academic subjects. Riley's honest answers about her circumstances only seemed to confirm whatever preconceptions Derek had formed about her character. Her description of growing up in foster care was met with awkward silence rather than empathy. Her explanation of choosing technical training for its practical value and career prospects was interpreted as lack of ambition rather than strategic thinking. The final blow came when Derek suggested that Riley might benefit more from counseling services than from peer mentorship, implying that her social difficulties stemmed from personal problems rather than the systematic exclusion she had experienced. His recommendation that she speak with the school psychologist felt like a diagnosis of mental illness rather than recognition of her legitimate need for social support. Riley left the library feeling more isolated than ever, her hopes for meaningful connection replaced by the bitter realization that even well-intentioned help could be corrupted by misconceptions and prejudice. Derek's obvious discomfort with her presence had communicated, more clearly than words, that she was viewed as a problem to be managed rather than a person deserving of respect. What Riley didn't realize was that their entire conversation had been observed by Madison Cross, who had positioned herself strategically in the library's upper level to monitor the interaction. Madison's satisfaction with the meeting's outcome was evident in her triumphant text messages to her inner circle, celebrating the successful manipulation of Derek's perceptions and the apparent failure of Riley's attempt to find institutional support. The betrayal represented by Derek's behavior was particularly devastating because it had been packaged as help. Riley had trusted the mentorship program as her path towards social acceptance, only to discover that even official support systems could be corrupted by the same prejudices that governed informal social interactions. The institutional legitimacy of the program had made Derek's rejection feel more authoritative and final than Madison's direct harassment. Over the following days, word of the failed mentorship spread through the school's social networks with the kind of efficiency that characterized high school gossip. The story evolved with each retelling, becoming increasingly distorted until Riley was portrayed as having made threatening statements or displayed disturbing behavior during the meeting with Derek. These rumors served Madison's purposes perfectly, creating a narrative that justified whatever escalation she was planning while positioning Riley as the aggressor rather than the victim. Students who might otherwise have questioned Madison's treatment of Riley now viewed her with suspicion, seeing her technical knowledge and professional training as evidence of potential danger rather than admirable achievement. Riley's teachers began treating her differently as well, their interactions colored by whispered conversations in faculty meetings about students who might pose security risks. Her participation in class discussions was met with subtle discouragement, and her access to laboratory equipment was quietly restricted based on vague safety concerns that had no basis in her actual behavior or performance. The systematic isolation that resulted from Derek's betrayal was more effective than any direct confrontation could have been. Riley found herself cut off not just from social acceptance, but from the educational opportunities that had represented her primary reason for enduring Westfield High's hostile environment. The very expertise that should have been her greatest asset had been transformed into evidence of her unfitness for normal social interaction. Madison's next move was already in motion, building on the foundation of suspicion and fear that Derek's compromised mentorship had established. The elaborate plan that would culminate in the locker incident was taking shape, each element designed to exploit the vulnerabilities that Riley's failed attempt at institutional support had revealed. The foam insulation canisters were already hidden in Madison's car, waiting for the perfect opportunity to teach Riley a lesson that would demonstrate the price of trying to rise above her designated place in Westfield High's social hierarchy. The following Wednesday arrived with an unseasonably cold October morning that seemed to mirror the growing hostility Riley faced at every turn in Westfield High's corridors. The failed mentorship program had become the catalyst for something far more sinister than simple social exclusion. Madison Cross had transformed Derek's uncomfortable report about Riley's concerning behavior into a carefully orchestrated campaign that painted Riley as a legitimate threat to student safety. The morning started innocuously enough. Riley arrived at school early, as had become her habit, hoping to avoid the crowded hallways where whispered conversations and pointed stares followed her every movement. The building felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of tension that made even routine interactions feel dangerous. Teachers who had previously treated her with professional neutrality now watched her with obvious wariness, their body language suggesting they had been briefed about potential security concerns. First period advanced physics proceeded normally until Dr. Morrison announced a new laboratory assignment involving pressure vessel testing. The project would require students to work with compressed air systems and monitoring equipment, exactly the kind of hands-on application that Riley typically excelled at. However, when students began forming their usual lab partnerships, Riley found herself completely excluded from every group. The isolation wasn't subtle. Students who had previously been willing to work with her now actively avoided eye contact, moving their materials to different lab stations when she approached. Their behavior suggested they had received specific warnings about her presence, transforming her expertise from an asset into a liability that nobody wanted to risk accepting. Dr. Morrison, observing the unusual dynamics, approached Riley's solitary workstation with an expression that combined sympathy with administrative necessity. He explained that due to recent safety concerns raised by the guidance department, Riley would need to work with simplified equipment that posed fewer potential risks. The modified assignment would cover the same theoretical concepts but without access to the sophisticated pressure monitoring systems that would have allowed her to demonstrate her professional level competence. The humiliation of being treated like a safety risk in her strongest academic subject was devastating. Riley understood that her technical knowledge was being deliberately neutralized, not because of any legitimate safety concerns, but because her expertise made other people uncomfortable. The very skills that should have earned her respect were now being used as evidence of her unsuitability for normal classroom participation. During lunch period, Riley sought refuge in the school library, hoping to find a quiet corner where she could eat her sandwich and complete homework assignments without enduring the hostile stares that followed her in more public spaces. Library had always felt like neutral territory, but even there she discovered that her presence was no longer welcome. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian who had previously been friendly and helpful, approached Riley's table with obvious reluctance. She explained that several students had complained about feeling uncomfortable studying near Riley, and while she personally didn't understand the concerns, she was required to ask Riley to use one of the small study carrels near the reference section instead of the main reading area. The reference section was effectively exile. The isolated carrels were typically used for students serving detention or those who had been removed from regular study areas for disruptive behavior. Being relegated to this space sent a clear message about Riley's status in the school's social hierarchy. She was no longer considered a regular student deserving of normal privileges, but a problem requiring special management. As Riley gathered her materials and moved to the designated isolation area, she became aware of Madison Cross and her inner circle occupying a nearby table. Their conversation was conducted in stage whispers clearly intended for Riley to overhear, discussing the disturbing things they had heard about her background and training. Madison's voice carried particular authority as she shared details about Riley's expertise with industrial chemicals and confined space equipment, framing these skills as evidence of dangerous intentions rather than professional competence. The conversation included specific details that could only have come from Derek's report about their mentorship meeting. Madison had clearly gained access to confidential information about Riley's application and background, using it to construct a narrative that portrayed every aspect of Riley's experience as threatening. Her volunteer work with emergency response teams became obsession with rescue scenarios. Her technical training became expertise in creating dangerous situations. Her calm demeanor under pressure became lack of normal emotional responses. Riley listened to this character assassination with growing anger and frustration. Every positive aspect of her background was being twisted into evidence of instability or malicious intent. The systematic distortion of facts was so thorough and convincing that Riley could understand why students and teachers were beginning to view her with suspicion. Madison's manipulation was masterful in its use of partial truths to create completely false impressions. The afternoon brought a new humiliation when Riley was called to the main office during fifth period. Principal Davis waited behind his imposing oak desk, flanked by Mrs. Henderson from the guidance department and Officer Martinez, the school's resource officer. The presence of law enforcement immediately signaled that this was no routine administrative meeting. Principal Davis began with carefully neutral language about the school's commitment to maintaining a safe learning environment for all students. He explained that recent concerns had been raised about Riley's background and training, particularly her access to specialized equipment and knowledge that might pose security risks in a school setting. The conversation was framed as precautionary rather than accusatory, but the implications were unmistakable. Mrs. Henderson presented a folder containing Derek's report from the failed mentorship session, along with additional documentation that had apparently been compiled about Riley's technical training and certification. The materials included photographs of Riley working with breathing apparatus and confined space equipment, images that had somehow been obtained from Northwest Technical Academy's training documentation. Seeing these professional credentials presented as evidence of potential threat was surreal and deeply demoralizing. Officer Martinez asked questions about Riley's access to the school's mechanical systems, referencing her conversations with Mr. Patterson, the custodian, as if they represented security breaches rather than educational curiosity. He inquired about her knowledge of the building's ventilation and emergency systems, treating her expertise as suspicious rather than potentially valuable for improving safety protocols. The interrogation continued for over an hour, covering every aspect of Riley's background that could conceivably be construed as threatening. Her experience with industrial chemicals, her training in emergency response procedures, even her physical fitness and ability to work in challenging conditions, were all presented as potential risk factors that required administrative attention. Riley's attempts to explain the safety-focused nature of her training only seemed to reinforce their concerns. Her descriptions of proper protocols and emergency procedures were interpreted as detailed knowledge of how to create dangerous situations, rather than how to prevent them. The very expertise that had earned her certification and respect in professional settings was being used as evidence of her unfitness for normal social interaction. The meeting concluded with Principal Davis informing Riley that while no formal disciplinary action was being taken, certain restrictions would be implemented for the safety of all students. She would no longer be permitted to access mechanical areas of the building without direct supervision. Her participation in laboratory exercises would be limited to basic equipment only. Most significantly, any future reports of concerning behavior would result in immediate suspension, pending a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Walking back to class after this humiliating interrogation, Riley felt the weight of systematic persecution settling around her like a physical presence. The school administration had essentially confirmed every rumor and suspicion that Madison had been spreading, giving official legitimacy to the campaign of isolation and mistrust that had been building since the failed mentorship program. The final class of the day was English literature, where Mrs. Williams had organized group presentations about characters who overcome adversity through personal strength and determination. The irony of discussing fictional heroes while being treated as a real-world villain was not lost on Riley. As other students presented their analyses of brave protagonists who triumphed over unjust circumstances, Riley sat in enforced silence, knowing that any participation would only draw more unwanted attention. After school, Riley walked slowly toward the bus stop, dreading the long ride back to Cedar Point Youth Center, where she would have to explain why she looked so defeated. The October wind cut through her jacket, and the early darkness made the familiar journey feel ominous rather than routine. She was so focused on her own misery that she almost missed the black sedan that had been following her since leaving school grounds. The car pulled up beside her just as she reached the isolated stretch of road between the school and the bus stop. Madison Cross rolled down the passenger window, her expression combining false sympathy with barely concealed satisfaction. Tyler Brooks sat behind the wheel, his face showing none of the uncertainty that had marked their previous encounters. In the back seat, Sam Wilson and Casey Martinez completed the crew that had been planning this moment for weeks. Madison's voice carried the tone of someone delivering bad news with forced regret. She explained that they had heard about Riley's meeting with the principal and wanted to offer their support during this difficult time. The words were carefully chosen to sound concerned rather than threatening, but the context made their true intentions unmistakable. Riley continued walking, hoping to reach the bus stop before the situation escalated, but Tyler accelerated slightly to keep pace with her movement. Madison continued her monologue about how sorry they were that things had worked out so badly for Riley at Westfield High. She mentioned hearing about the restrictions that had been placed on Riley's activities and expressed sympathy for how isolated she must feel. The false sympathy was more infuriating than direct hostility would have been. Madison was savoring her victory, enjoying the opportunity to observe the effects of her carefully orchestrated campaign. Every word was designed to remind Riley of her powerlessness while maintaining the appearance of friendly concern that would look innocent to any casual observer. When Riley finally reached the bus stop, she discovered that the evening schedule had been changed due to driver shortages, leaving her stranded for at least another hour. The timing felt too convenient to be coincidental, and Riley suspected that Madison's network of information had included advanced knowledge of this transportation disruption. Madison emerged from the car with exaggerated concern, offering to drive Riley back to Cedar Point Youth Center as a gesture of goodwill. The offer was accompanied by assurances that they only wanted to help and that any previous misunderstandings had been forgotten. Tyler, Sam, and Casey also got out of the car, surrounding Riley in what they presented as a friendly gesture, but which felt unmistakably like a trap. Riley's training had taught her to recognize dangerous situations and trust her instincts about potential threats. Every aspect of this encounter triggered warning signals that she couldn't ignore. Madison's excessive friendliness, the convenient timing of the transportation disruption, and the presence of the entire crew all suggested that this was a planned operation rather than a spontaneous offer of assistance. When Riley politely declined the ride, explaining that she preferred to wait for the bus, Madison's expression shifted subtly from false sympathy to something harder and more calculating. She mentioned that it was getting quite cold and that Riley looked tired after such a stressful day. The concern felt like a threat disguised as kindness, and Riley understood that refusing their help was being interpreted as ungrateful and suspicious behavior. Tyler stepped closer, his physical presence adding weight to Madison's verbal pressure. He pointed out that the nearest bus wouldn't arrive for over an hour, and that standing alone in the dark wasn't safe for someone who had been having such difficulties at school. His words carried implications about Riley's reputation and the possibility that other students might target her if they found her vulnerable and isolated. The manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Madison's crew had created a situation where accepting their help felt dangerous, but refusing it would appear irrational and antisocial. They were forcing Riley to choose between obvious physical vulnerability and the less obvious but potentially greater danger of placing herself under their control. Riley's attempt to call Aunt Lisa for alternative transportation was thwarted when she discovered that her phone battery had died during the day. The failure felt too convenient to be accidental, and she suspected that Madison's preparation for this encounter had included ensuring that Riley would be cut off from outside help when the confrontation finally occurred. With darkness falling and no other options available, Riley reluctantly accepted Madison's offer of transportation. As she climbed into the backseat of Tyler's car, wedged between Sam and Casey, she felt like she was walking into a carefully prepared trap. Madison's triumphant smile as they pulled away from the bus stop confirmed that this had been the intended outcome all along. The drive towards Cedar Point Youth Center took an unexpected route through an abandoned industrial district that Riley recognized from her training sessions at Northwest Technical Academy. The area was deserted at this time of day, filled with empty warehouses and defunct manufacturing facilities that would provide complete privacy for whatever Madison had planned. Tyler pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned textile factory, explaining that he needed to stop for gas at a station that Riley knew didn't exist in this area. As the car doors opened and Madison's crew emerged with obvious purpose, Riley realized that her worst fears about their intentions were about to be confirmed. The foam insulation canisters that Tyler retrieved from the trunk made their plans terrifyingly clear. Madison's expression had abandoned all pretense of sympathy, revealing the cold satisfaction of someone who had finally cornered their prey after weeks of careful planning. She explained that they had brought Riley here to teach her a lesson about knowing her place in the social order of Westfield High. The isolation of the location ensured that no one would interrupt whatever humiliation they had prepared. Riley understood that she was about to face the most dangerous situation of her young life, but her training had prepared her for exactly this kind of crisis. As Madison's crew advanced with their industrial-grade foam and cruel intentions, Riley began the mental preparations that would determine whether she would emerge from this encounter as a victim or as someone who had finally found the strength to fight back against systematic persecution. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.